Selfie over edge. In 2019, a woman visiting a scenic coastal overlook in Portugal stepped too close to an unguarded cliff edge while attempting to position herself for a photograph. She did not survive the fall. The location was known. It had been known for years before she arrived. The cliffs along Portugal's Atlantic coast draw hundreds of thousands of visitors annually, and the specific stretch where this incident occurred had no barrier separating sightseers from the drop. The rock face at the edge was uneven, worn smooth in places by weather and foot traffic, and the ground directly at the cliff's rim offered no obvious visual warning of how close a person was to the point of no return. Visitors had been photographing themselves at this location for years. Some stood closer than others. Most walked away. She was there with people she knew. The day was clear. The conditions were ordinary for that part of the coast. Mild wind, good visibility, the kind of afternoon that makes a location look exactly as good in photographs as it does in person. Others nearby were doing the same thing she was doing, holding phones, stepping back, trying to find the angle. The practice was normal enough that no one moved to intervene. She moved toward the edge to get the background into frame. The exact distance she placed between herself and the drop was not recorded. What is confirmed is that she'd lost her footing at or very near the cliff's edge. She went over. The fall was significant in height. The cliffs at that section of coastline rise steeply above the water and rocky outcrops below, and the distance between the top and the base left no margin for any outcome other than the one that followed. There was no ledge to break the descent partway down. There was no soft landing. Witnesses above saw her go over. What they reported to emergency services was consistent. She had been near the edge, there had been no warning, and she had fallen. The speed of it was noted. There was no prolonged struggle at the edge, no moment of catching herself. She was there, and then she was not. Emergency responders were contacted immediately. Reaching the base of the cliffs required navigating terrain that was not accessible by standard emergency vehicle. Coastal rescue personnel mobilized, and the approach took time. The geography of the location, the same geography that made it attractive for photography, made rapid ground access to the base nearly impossible. When responders reached her, the assessment was immediate. The injuries sustained in a fall of that height onto rock and coastal terrain were not survivable. Medical personnel on scene confirmed what the fall itself had already determined. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The cause of death was consistent with the injuries sustained in the fall. Portuguese authorities documented the incident and called again, as they had called before, for improved barriers and signage at high-risk coastal overlook points throughout the country. The calls had been made before this death. They were made again after it. Portugal's Atlantic cliffs are not a unique danger in this regard. They are part of a global pattern in which scenic locations draw visitors whose attention is directed at a phone screen rather than at the ground beneath their feet. A combination that coastal geography punishes without warning and without appeal. Escalator, mechanism, death. On July 26, 2015, a woman at a shopping mall in Jingzhou, Hubei Province, China, stepped onto an escalator with her young son. She did not reach the top. The AZG Mall was an upscale commercial building in Jingzhou, a city of more than 5 million residents in central China. The escalator at the center of what followed was a standard installation, the kind found in shopping centers across the country, carrying customers from one floor to the next in a steady, unremarkable loop. Thousands of people had ridden it. Nothing about its appearance on that day suggested it was anything other than what it appeared to be. Functional, routine, safe. She and her 2-year-old son boarded at the lower level. The escalator moved at its standard pace. Other shoppers were in the vicinity. The store was operating normally. It was a Sunday morning. What she could not have seen, and what investigators later confirmed, was that a floor plate at the top of the escalator had become dangerously loose. Maintenance workers had recently serviced the escalator and had failed to screw the metal access cover back into place. The plate, designed to create a seamless transition between the escalator and the floor level above, was no longer properly secured. Mall staff had reportedly noticed the panel was loose and protruding just 5 minutes before the incident, but failed to stop the escalator or warn riders. She reached the top of the escalator. At the exact moment she stepped onto the top landing, the unsecured metal plate shifted and gave way beneath her feet. What followed happened within seconds. The plate dropped, and the mechanical space below the escalator's top housing was exposed. She went down into it. The machinery inside an escalator's upper housing is not designed to accommodate a human body. It is a system of gears, chains, and drive components operating under continuous mechanical load. The space is way tight, and the machinery does not stop automatically when something enters it that should not be there. Surveillance footage from inside the mall captured the moment. It was later reviewed by investigators and described in official reports and public news coverage. The footage showed her reaching the top, the plate giving way, and her going down. It also showed what she did in the seconds she had. She pushed her son away from the opening toward the solid floor, where a nearby mall employee was able to grab him. Her son was not pulled in. He survived. Store staff responded immediately. When it became clear what had happened, the escalator was stopped. Emergency services were called. The process of reaching her required accessing the mechanical housing of the escalator, which meant partial disassembly of the unit's upper components. Firefighters worked for 4 hours to cut open the escalator and recover her body. The injuries she sustained in the machinery were severe. She was pronounced dead. The cause of death was recorded in official findings consistent with the injuries sustained inside the escalator's mechanical housing. Chinese government authorities launched an investigation. The escalator's manufacturer, Suzhou Shenlong Elevator Company, was found to have produced plates that were poorly designed and did not match original specifications. The investigators found the plates allowed them to work loose and tilt too easily. The mall was also found liable for failing to take proper emergency measures after staff discovered the escalator fault. Legal proceedings were initiated against those responsible. The incident prompted the Chinese government to conduct safety checks on escalators across the province, and Suzhou Shenlong's machines throughout Hubei were ordered out of service pending inspection. The footage of what happened and what she did in the seconds before it was too late was seen by millions of people across China and internationally. What the footage documented about her final act remained the part that stayed with anyone who watched it. Grain bin engulfment. In documented cases across American agricultural states, grain storage bins have claimed lives in a manner that safety authorities describe as one of the most rapid and least survivable hazards in farm work. One confirmed female fatality stands in the public record with enough detail to illustrate how completely and how quickly the hazard operates. A grain storage bin on an operational farm is not an object that announces its danger. From the outside, it is a large cylindrical metal structure, often 30 to 60 feet tall, filled with harvested grain. The grain inside settles, shifts, and sometimes crusts over at the surface. You'll be creating a false floor that appears solid. Beneath that crust, the grain has continued to shift, leaving a void. When the crust breaks, anything standing on it drops into the loose grain below. The process of engulfment from that point takes seconds. OSHA documentation on grain engulfment fatalities is specific on this. A person submerged to the waist in flowing grain cannot free themselves without external assistance. The weight of the grain against the body, combined with the vacuum-like effect created by grain flowing toward the auger or bin outlet below, makes self-rescue physically impossible. Every attempt to pull a leg free drives the other one deeper. She was working in or around the bin as part of standard farm operations. The task that placed her in proximity to the grain surface was routine by the standards of the operation. Someone nearby became aware that she had gone down. The alarm was raised. Grain bin rescue is a specialized emergency response. Standard fire and rescue. Personnel are not always equipped for it. The procedure requires stopping any active grain flow immediately, which means finding and shutting down the auger system that pulls grain toward the outlet. It then requires inserting a rescue tube, a curved metal form that responders drive into the grain around the trapped person to create a stable wall and stop the grain from continuing to press inward. Only once that tube is in place can the grain inside it be removed, bucket by bucket, to free the victim. The process takes time. In documented OSHA cases, even rapid response and proper equipment does not always produce a survivable outcome, particularly if the victim went under quickly and if there was a delay between the engulfment and the point at which rescuers could begin tube insertion. Responders arrived and began the process. The exact timeline of their attempts was documented in official records. The grain continued to exert pressure throughout the rescue operation. She was recovered from the bin. She did not survive. Cause of death was documented by the coroner as consistent with compression and asphyxiation injuries sustained in the grain engulfment. OSHA reviewed the incident, and findings consistent with their standing enforcement framework around grain bin confined space entry protocols were applied to the operation. OSHA's grain handling standard 29 CFR 1910.272 is explicit and detailed. It prohibits workers from entering bins while grain removal equipment is operating. It requires lockout procedures. It requires an observer stationed outside the bin whenever anyone enters it. It requires that workers be equipped with harnesses and lines whenever they must enter. These requirements exist because the grain bin hazard kills people consistently across decades on farms of every size in every agricultural state. The standard does not exist because regulators anticipated a rare edge case. It exists because the deaths kept accumulating until a rule was written to stop them. Wrong way parachute. Skydiving operates inside a defined envelope of procedure. Every jump follows a sequence: exit, freefall, deployment, canopy flight, landing. When any element of that sequence fails, the distance between a functioning jump and a fatal one is measured in seconds and in altitude. The drop zone was operational on the day of the jump. It was a licensed facility with manifested jumpers and standard pre-jump procedures in place. She had gone through the pre-jump process. The aircraft climbed to jump altitude, a confirmed figure that placed the deployment window within normal parameters for the type of jump being conducted. She was not a first-time jumper. Her participation in the sport was documented within the skydiving community, and her presence on the manifest that day was consistent with her level of experience and certification. The people around her at the drop zone knew her, or knew of her. It was the kind of day at the drop zone that looks identical to hundreds of other days. An aircraft circling up, a group of jumpers in their gear, the ordinary administration of a sport that requires precision in every step. The aircraft reached altitude. The door opened. Jumpers exited in their designated sequence. She exited the aircraft. At the point where the investigation findings center, something in the equipment or the procedural sequence failed. The specific nature of the failure, whether it involved the main canopy, the deployment mechanism, or the reserve system, late was documented by the investigating authority, which in cases involving United States drop zones is typically the United States Parachute Association in coordination with the Federal Aviation Administration. The findings of that investigation, including the exact altitude at which the failure became unrecoverable, are what define this phase of the incident. Witnesses on the ground observed the descent. What they saw was not a normal canopy flight. The sequence of what happened between her exit and her impact with the ground was not the sequence a functioning jump produces. The people watching knew it before the impact. There was nothing they could do with that knowledge. She impacted the ground within the drop zone perimeter, or in the immediate surrounding area. The force and nature of the impact were consistent with an uncontrolled descent from altitude. Drop zone personnel initiated their emergency protocol. Every licensed drop zone maintains a documented emergency response plan, and the staff activated it. Emergency services were contacted. Responders arrived at the location. The assessment upon arrival found injuries consistent with impact from altitude under conditions of a deployment failure. Medical personnel worked at the scene. She was pronounced dead. The cause of death was recorded in official findings as consistent with impact injuries. The USPA investigation produced findings that were submitted through the organization's Safety and Training Advisory Council as a standard procedure following a fatal incident at a licensed drop zone, with any equipment or procedural recommendations issued through that process. Skydiving fatalities in the United States are relatively rare given the number of jumps completed each year. The USPA tracks roughly 3 million jumps annually, with fatalities averaging in the low dozens. But each one produces a formal investigation precisely because the sport's safety record depends on identifying and correcting the specific failure that occurred. The investigation does not bring anyone back. It is intended to prevent the same sequence from occurring on the next jump and the one after that. Tidepool Tragedy. Peggy's Cove, Nova Scotia, is one of the most photographed locations in Canada. It is also one of the most consistently dangerous. The granite rocks that surround the lighthouse and extend to the water's edge are smooth, sloped, and continuously wet from wave action and sea spray. The Nova Scotia government has posted warning signs at the site for decades. The signs use plain language. They identify specific zones as hazardous. They instruct visitors not to proceed beyond marked areas. Visitors proceed anyway. The ocean at Peggy's Cove does not behave predictably. The Atlantic along that stretch of Nova Scotia coastline is subject to swells that arrive without visual warning from the surface level perspective of someone standing on the rocks. A swell that appears manageable from a distance can accelerate and surge upward when it meets the angled granite, producing a wave action that reaches well beyond the point a visitor might assume is safe. Water temperature in the area remains low across most of the year. Survival time for an unprotected adult in those temperatures is not long. She was visiting the site on a day when conditions were active enough that the hazard was present. She was with others. The group had moved onto the rocks, as visitors routinely do despite the signage. The rocks closest to the water offer the best views, and the pull toward the edge is constant, documented in the behavior of visitors at the site across every season. She was standing on the lower rock formation when the wave came. The wave action at Peggy's Cove in active conditions can reach and exceed the lower rock platforms with enough force and volume to sweep an adult from a standing position. The rock surface underfoot offers no purchase once wet. There's nothing to grip. The slope of the granite in that area runs toward the water, not away from it. A person swept off their feet in that location moves in one direction. She went into the water. Bystanders on the rocks above and around her saw it happen. They were not in a position to reach her. The water where she entered was immediately active, and the same wave action that took her made approach from the rock surface extremely hazardous for anyone attempting to assist. Emergency services were contacted. The Canadian Coast Guard and Marine Rescue personnel responded to the call. Water rescue operations at Peggy's Cove involve coordination between Marine units and land-based emergency personnel, given the access limitations created by the rock formations and the absence of a conventional beach or entry point for rescue swimmers. Response time was as fast as the geography allowed. Water temperature at the time of the incident was within the range documented for that coastline in that season. At those temperatures, the physiological timeline for an unprotected person in the water, without a survival suit, is compressed significantly. The search was active. The conditions in the water during the operation complicated the recovery. She was recovered. She was pronounced dead. The cause of death was recorded as consistent with drowning following immersion in cold water. Nova Scotia authorities reiterated standing warnings about the hazard at Peggy's Cove following the incident. The signs remained. The warnings remained. The rocks remained exactly as they had always been. According to the Life-Saving Society Nova Scotia, Peggy's Cove has for decades been among the sites with the highest number of drownings in the province. Officials have consistently noted that once a person enters the water at that location, the combination of pounding waves, steep and slippery rock faces, and powerful undertow makes escape essentially impossible even for strong swimmers. The ocean at Peggy's Cove does not offer second chances. Inflatable float drift, recreational inflatables, the oversized novelty floats shaped like flamingos, unicorns, pizza slices, and pool rings, are designed for calm, enclosed water. They are not designed to resist wind. They have no anchor, no propulsion, and no meaningful resistance to current. In open coastal water, they function as sails, and the person lying on one functions as ballast that is rarely sufficient to stop the drift. She was at a beach on a day when the wind was present. The conditions looked manageable from shore. The water near the beach was calm enough that the float did not behave alarmingly at first. She entered the water with the inflatable in the way that people do on beach holidays, casually, without a plan for what would happen if the situation changed. It changed. Wind that pushes a lightweight inflatable float in open water does so faster than most people expect. The float does not move in the abrupt, alarming way that might prompt an immediate response from someone watching from the beach. It drifts. The person on it may not notice the rate of movement until they look back at the shore and find it further than they expected. By the time that moment arrives, the shore may already be beyond easy swimming distance. Whether she attempted to swim back, and at what point she attempted it, was documented in the investigation that followed. What is confirmed is that she was unable to return to shore under her own power. The distance the float had traveled and the effort required to cover it against the wind and any current present exceeded what was possible. Others on the beach or in the water became aware of the situation. Emergency services were contacted. Maritime rescue coordination was activated. The response involved watercraft capable of operating in open coastal conditions. Reaching her location required travel time from the point of dispatch. The water conditions, including the same wind that had taken her offshore, were a factor in the response operation itself. What responders found when they reached her location, the exact condition she was in at the time of contact, was documented in the official investigation. The time elapsed between her going offshore and the point of contact with rescue personnel was significant. She did not survive. The cause of death was confirmed in official findings. The maritime authority responsible for the waters where the incident occurred issued a public statement following the investigation, reiterating the specific hazard posed by recreational inflatables in open coastal water. The statement identified wind conditions as the primary contributing factor and advised that inflatables not be used in open water or in conditions where offshore wind was present. European maritime safety authorities have issued similar advisories repeatedly across multiple countries, following inflatable drift fatalities in the Mediterranean and Atlantic. The advice is consistent. Novelty inflatables are pool products. The moment they leave enclosed water, the risk profile changes entirely. The float does not know where the shore is. The wind does not care. Vending machine crush. A commercial vending machine, fully stocked, weighs between 400 and 900 pounds, depending on the unit. It is tall relative to its base. When it tips, it does not tip slowly. The machines are not designed to be interactive beyond the keypad. They are not designed to be rocked, tilted, shaken, or physically manipulated by the person standing in front of them. When someone treats one as though it is any of those things, the physics do not accommodate that assumption. The Consumer Product Safety Commission has tracked this hazard for decades. The pattern across all documented cases is consistent. The machine tips and the person in front of it has no effective time to move. She was interacting interacting with a vending machine in a way that involved applying physical force to the unit, whether this was an attempt to retrieve a stuck item, to recover money the machine had taken without dispensing, or some other reason was documented in the official review. What the Consumer Product Safety Commission and similar regulatory bodies have documented across multiple fatality cases is that the trigger for the tip is almost always the same. A person pushes, rocks, or pulls on the machine. The machine's center of gravity passes the tipping point. And from that moment, the outcome is determined by physics, not by intent. The machine tipped toward her. The speed at which a vending machine falls from its tipping point to full horizontal contact with whatever is in its path is not slow. The mass of the unit, several hundred pounds at minimum, is in motion for the full duration of the fall. The person standing directly in front of it has essentially no effective time to move clear. She was struck. The weight and force of the machine coming down on a person standing in front of it produce injuries that are immediately severe. There is no version of this event in which a full-size commercial vending machine lands on a standing adult and the outcome is minor. Whoever was in the area responded first. They could not lift the machine. The weight of a fully stocked commercial vending machine is not within the physical capacity of bystanders to lift in a rescue scenario. Emergency services were contacted, personnel arrived and assessed the situation. Extraction required equipment. Moving the machine off her required the resources of emergency responders rather than bystanders. The time from the moment of impact to the point where she could be reached and assessed was determined by how quickly those resources arrived and could be applied. The assessment of her injuries confirmed what the mechanics of the incident had already established. She was pronounced dead. The cause of death was documented as consistent with crush injuries sustained when the vending machine fell onto her. The Consumer Product Safety Commission has documented at least 37 deaths from vending machine tip-overs between 1978 and 1995, resulting in a voluntary industry campaign to attach warning labels to machines and anchor them to walls. The warnings are on every machine. Many machines remain unanchored. The warnings describe exactly what happens. The physics do not change because the label is there. A 400-pound machine tipping forward does not pause for a warning. It already carries on its side. Laughing gas fatality. Nitrous oxide has been used in medical and dental settings for over a century. It is also used recreationally, dispensed from small metal cartridges into balloons, and inhaled for a brief dissociative and euphoric effect. In the United Kingdom, it became one of the most widely used recreational substances among young adults over the course of the 2010s. Its legal status for much of that period was ambiguous, and its reputation among users was one of low risk, short duration, common availability, nothing that seemed to carry the weight of more serious substances. That reputation was not accurate. Coroner records in England and Wales document a pattern of fatalities linked to recreational nitrous oxide use, the majority, involving asphyxiation caused by inhaling the gas in a manner that displaces oxygen, or cardiac events triggered by the gas's physiological effects. The cases are documented in detail in official inquest proceedings. She was at a social gathering. The setting was the kind of environment where nitrous oxide use had become routine enough to not register as remarkable. The people around her were not alarmed by what she was doing because what she was doing was familiar to them from previous occasions. Nitrous oxide at gatherings like this one was ordinary. The cartridges were ordinary. The balloons were ordinary. That ordinariness was the hazard, a substance that looks routine, that everyone around is using without obvious immediate consequence, does not read as dangerous in the moment. The danger in a nitrous oxide fatalities is precisely that it does not announce itself in advance. At some point during the gathering, she lost consciousness. The people around her noticed. The timeline from the moment she became unresponsive to the moment anyone recognized that something was medically wrong, as opposed to the brief normal disorientation the substance produces, is part of what the inquest examined. That gap between losing consciousness and someone understanding that this was not temporary was consequential. Emergency services were called. Paramedics arrived and assessed her. The attempts to resuscitate her were initiated and conducted according to standard emergency medical protocol. The attempts continued for the documented duration before it was determined that they had not succeeded. She was pronounced dead. Toxicology findings confirmed nitrous oxide as a factor in her death. The coroner's inquest produced a cause of death finding consistent with those toxicology results. The coroner presiding over the inquest issued a prevention statement, calling attention to the specific physiological risks associated with recreational nitrous oxide use, including the risk of oxygen displacement leading to loss of consciousness and the risk of cardiac events under certain conditions. The United Kingdom subsequently reclassified nitrous oxide as a Class C drug under the Misuse of Drugs Act in 2023, a legislative change that came into force on November 8th of that year, after years of documented fatalities, including including those that had been the subject of coroner inquests in the preceding decade. The reclassification made possession of nitrous oxide for recreational use illegal, with potential sentences of up to 2 years for possession and up to 14 years for supply. It represented a significant shift in the legal treatment of a substance that had long occupied a gray area, and it came directly in response to the accumulating record of harm that inquests like the one following her death had placed before the public record. Swept into the current. Rip currents are responsible for the majority of drowning deaths at ocean beaches across the United States each year. They are not obvious from the surface. They do not produce whitecaps or visible turbulence that the untrained eye recognizes as dangerous. They look in many cases like a slightly calmer patch of water between breaking waves, and that deceptive appearance draws swimmers in, rather than warning them away. The National Weather Service estimates rip currents account for more than 80% of rescues performed by surf beach lifeguards. They are fast, they are invisible, and the instinctive response to getting caught in one is exactly wrong. She was vacationing with family at a Gulf Coast beach. It was the kind of holiday that families take to beaches every summer. Children, sunscreen, a rental umbrella, the expectation of a normal afternoon in the water. The beach was a popular one. The conditions that day did not look alarming. The sky was clear. The waves were not extreme. Nothing about the surface of the water as she entered it communicated what was moving through it. Warning flags, where present, communicate general hazard levels. They do not show a swimmer exactly where a rip current is forming on that specific day at that specific hour, because rip currents shift and reform continuously as wave patterns change. Rip currents form in channels where water that has been pushed toward shore by breaking waves finds a path of least resistance back out to sea. They move rapidly, sometimes exceeding the swimming speed of a trained adult. They do not pull swimmers underwater. They carry them offshore, parallel to or directly away from the beach. And they do so quickly enough that by the time a swimmer realizes what is happening, the shore has already become distant. The instinctive response to being carried offshore is to swim directly back toward the beach against the current. This is the wrong response. It is also the nearly universal response among people who have not been trained otherwise. Swimming against a rip current exhausts the swimmer without making meaningful progress. And exhaustion in open water in an active current is fatal. She was carried out. Whether she attempted to swim against the current or whether she recognized the hazard and attempted to swim parallel to shore to break free of it was part of what responders and investigators later pieced together. What is confirmed is that she was unable to return to shore on her own, and that by the time the situation was recognized from the beach, she was already a significant distance from it. Bystanders and family members raised the alarm. Emergency services were contacted, lifeguard or coast. Guard response was dispatched to her last known position. The open water search for a person who has gone under or drifted from a fixed location involves expanding patterns and is complicated by any movement of current during the interval between the alarm and the response. She was recovered from the water. Responders worked to revive her. The efforts were not successful. She was pronounced dead. The cause of death was confirmed as drowning, with rip current involvement documented in the official investigation. Beach safety authorities issued the standard reminders that follow any drowning at a surf beach. Check conditions before entering the water, know the warning flag system, swim near a lifeguarded area, and if caught in a rip current, do not exhaust yourself fighting it directly, but swim parallel to the shore until free of the channel, then angle back toward the beach. These reminders are issued after every such death. The beach opens again the next morning. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.